So moving forward to our next session, funding landscape in India. So a city or a township is planned and built based on the land, terrain, and availability of basic resources. Thus, a comprehensive study of the territory or the process one is trying to engage him or herself in is must for one to succeed in it. Similarly, a startup should have a comprehensive study on the landscape of fundraising. I would like to invite Dr. Dhruv to shed light on the topic of funding landscape in India. A brief about Dr. Dhruvnath. Dr. Dhruvnath is an angel investor and mentor and director at Lead Angels. Lead Angels is an alumni focused angel network facilitating investments in early stage companies. Lead Angel Network, with a total of 200 plus members, look for high potential entrepreneurs at early stages and support them in leveraging their expertise to build a successful enterprise across diverse sectors. They have invested in 45 plus startups like Enrich, GoDesi, Sarthi.ai, and their current investment portfolio consists of 28 companies. Also, Mr. Dhruvanath is co-author of a book, Funding Your Startup and Other Nightmares. So, over to you, sir, for the lecture.
Okay, thank you, Mansvi. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Because sometimes there are dogs barking in the neighborhood, and therefore you can hear the dogs, which actually may be more exciting than hearing me.
No, sir, we can hear you.
Okay, so let me just start my presentation. 1 minute.
Sure, sir.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, sir.
What do investors look for? Okay, good.
Yes.
So I will do this in two parts, right? First of all, as you might imagine, um, since most of you are early stage startups, I assume some of you have ideas, some of you have um, maybe created a prototype or a pilot, some of you are in early stages of revenues. So your focus would be more on early stage startups. So therefore, I will focus on early stage funding, number one. Number two, what I will do is I will start with what investors look for, right? And in the second part, I will talk about how the behavior, the attitude, what they look for has changed over the past 10 to 20 years, specifically in the Indian environment, right? And then we can have questions. So, like Manasvi correctly mentioned, this entire talk is based on a book that I and my co-author have written. I don't know if you can see the book here. It's called Funding Your Startup and Other Nightmares, right? So first of all, let me just talk about what investors look for, and I will share with you one example. See, this book has a lot of stories, so I'll share with you a few stories from the book. One of these stories is about a company called Uno Finance, and I'll take that as an example and tell you why I'm sharing this story. So Uno Finance essentially solves the problem of taking a loan when you're getting hospitalized or when your relative is getting hospitalized. Right now, loans, as you know, are available for every damn thing. You can get a loan for buying a house, for buying a car, for buying a motorbike, TV, etc., but not for hospitalization. And the question is why? Very simple: high risk. Right? You go into hospital, either you don't come out, unfortunately, or you come out, but maybe for 6 to 8 months you're not able to work, and therefore you can't pay the loan. Correct? So therefore, loans for hospitalization has been a very, very slow growing area. Most banks and NBFCs do not want to give these loans. However, if you look at hospitalization, there is also low risk hospitalization. For example, suppose you're going in for, let's say, knee surgery, right? What we also call arthroscopy. That's not a risky surgery. At best, at worst, what will happen is that you may be walking on crutches for maybe 1 month or 2 months, but there is no risk to life. There is no risk to your job. There is no risk to your income. Therefore, the risk of not paying back the loan does not exist in this case, right? So therefore, if you were to take the low risk hospitalization areas, definitely loans can be given for these kinds of hospitalization. So this is where Uno Finance got in, and it's a company which is approximately 4 years old. So they gave loans for these. The revenue model is very interesting. You know what the rate of interest is? What rate of interest they charge for their loans? It's zero. You know why? Because many hospitals they realize have spare capacity, and therefore they realize, many patients cannot afford those hospitals. But if you give a loan, the patient can now afford them. So the capacity utilization of the hospital goes up, which means the hospital is happy, they're getting more revenue. They give Uno Finance a commission for every patient, right? So the money that Uno Finance earns is not from the interest on loans, it is from the commission that they get from hospitals. Okay, that's their revenue model. And the interesting thing is they don't do any advertising on Facebook. There are no Google ads, etc., etc. What they do is, or they have partnerships with a lot of hospitals, and each such hospital they will have a kiosk at the reception, right? So look at the way it's working out. You have somebody who goes in, meets a doctor, and the doctor tells him or her, look, you have treatment, you have hospitalization, it's going to cost you 5 lakhs. And the patient comes out scared. My God, 5 lakhs. I don't have 5 lakhs. I have to go to a cheaper hospital, right? But when he's walking out, he sees the Uno Finance kiosk. And what does that say? Zero interest EMIs. So the guy jumps. He says, "Was this is exactly what I've been looking for." And this is how these guys market. Okay. So now, given that background, let me talk about something that we call a framework for a successful startup. And this is a framework that you need to follow. And by the way, this is also a framework that investors follow before they take a decision to invest. Okay. So the framework, which again is picked up from the book, is called persistent, which essentially means each of these letters stands for something. So P, the first letter, problem. Are you solving a problem for somebody? If you're not, obviously you don't have a business, correct? So clearly these guys were solving a problem because there were many people who couldn't afford hospitalization in good hospitals, and now they were able to afford it. So they were solving a problem. Secondly, not only should you be solving a problem, but somewhere you have to earn money out of it, isn't it? Otherwise, you're running a charity. So here they were not earning money from the patient, they were actually earning money from the hospital, which was very grateful because one extra patient had been sent to them. Okay. So they had a very good, strong earnings model. Third, size of the market. Now, obviously, the market for loans is huge. Potentially everybody, every middle class Indian would want a loan, right? And many people who are not even in the middle class. So maybe you're talking of about 60, 70 crores, right? Unfortunately, so the market size is very large. Unfortunately, it's a very crowded market, which means lots and lots of competitors. Because there are all kinds of guys giving loans, right? Shriram Finance, L&T Finance, Bajaj Finance, Bajaj Capital, all these guys are giving loan. So the problem is, if there is such a crowded market, so many competitors, how the hell can a new guy succeed? And the only way he can succeed is within that crowded market if he identifies a subset which is large enough but is not crowded. And in this case, they had identified this subset, which I call a niche, which is the hospital loan market. So they're not giving general loans. They're not giving loans for cars. They're not giving loans for buying a house. They're not giving a loan to take your girlfriend or boyfriend out to dinner. They are giving you a loan if unfortunately you or your family need to go into hospital, right? So that's a niche, a subset, but a large enough niche. And it's not crowded because nobody else is doing this, or very few other people are doing it, right? So these are your first four pieces of the persistent framework. Fifth piece is scalability. Size of the market is important, because if your market size is small, obviously you can't grow. Scalability is something a little different. It means how rapidly can you grow within the market that you have identified. Agreed? Now, if you look at Uno Finance, everything they're doing is online. And online businesses are very, very, very scalable, right? You look at Make My Trip, highly scalable business, right? You look at Policy Bazaar, entirely online, no manpower involvement, entirely scalable, very highly scalable. On the other hand, you look at, let's say, Infosys. Infosys is a manpower dependent business, because you want to double revenues, you have to double manpower, right? And that's not easy, because then you also have to double the buildings, the infrastructure, the air conditioning, etc., etc., etc. So, wherever you have a lot of manpower involved, wherever you have a lot of infrastructure required for growth, your business becomes less scalable. Here, Uno Finance is entirely digital, except for that one person who's manning the kiosk. And even that person, over time, as patients get more and more comfortable with self-service kiosks, they can do away with this person, right? So it's a very highly scalable model. Agreed? So I've told you 5 pieces of the persistent model. The next is R for risks. Obviously, every business has risks, and the biggest risk, or one of the biggest risks, is the risk of competition getting in, taking away your market share, taking away your customers, and ultimately maybe killing you. All right. So, which is why you need to build what I call an entry barrier. What's an entry barrier? This is your business. Can you do something in your business which prevents your competitor from getting in? If you can do that, right, then you've made it tougher for your competitor to get in, and therefore you are more likely to survive in this environment, right? So that's the second thing, which is what I call an entry barrier, right? And by the way, if you have a highly innovative solution which is tough to copy, for example, if you have a patent, you have a very good entry barrier, right? So try and create innovative solutions which the other guy will find difficult to copy, and that creates a good solid entry barrier. Agreed? So now let's take a look at the entry barrier of the company we've been discussing, which is Uno Finance. Okay. Actually, if you look at it, first of all, the fact that they have tied up with hospitals, that itself is a bit of an entry barrier. Why? Because, if you have a hospital, you can't have 30 kiosks sitting there in the reception. You'll have at the most 4 or 5, right? So if you are one of them, at least you've kept out the others beyond 5. Okay, so there is some level of entry barrier once you have tied up with a hospital. However, it is not great, right? Because you can still have 5, 6 guys. So now what they did was they actually created a wonderful new entry barrier. And let me explain what they did. So this is the next phase of their business, of their growth. What they did was they said, let us now expand the market and let us now look at higher risk hospitalization. Please remember, I had told you companies give loans for low risk hospitalization because they don't know whether the loan will be paid back or not. Uno Finance said, now let's look at the higher risk category because nobody is giving loans there, right? And therefore, that's a huge entry barrier if we can successfully do it. So, what did they do? So, what they did was they said, okay, for the higher risk category, let us estimate the risk of each patient. Each patient. And what do they do? So first of all, they had a lot of doctors on their rolls, and these doctors, they went over lots and lots and lots of medical journals to see, look, for this kind of patient with diabetes, with maybe high blood pressure, in the age group of 50 to 60, for this treatment, this disease, what is the likely risk? Okay, so they got that first level of risk. Second, what they also did was they actually did a lot of analytics. They also analyzed data based on the hospital, the doctor, the patient history, right? And they were capturing this data as they went along, right? So their estimation of risk, evaluation of risk became very, 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 very accurate over time. And therefore, they said if the risk is only, let's say, 10%, no problem, we'll give a loan, but then we will charge a certain level of interest. If it is 20%, we will still give the loan, but we will charge a higher interest. If it is more than 20%, no, we will not give the loan. So suddenly, from a situation where they were giving loans to zero risk patients, now they were giving loans to patients with some risk, but they had very accurately estimated the risk. Okay. Now, this is very, very important because suddenly they had set themselves apart from the crowd, from all the other competitors. Why? Because nobody else was giving these loans, and for somebody else to give this kind of loan, they would need to do the same kind of research, do the same analytics capability, which would take them maybe 6 months to 1 year, by which time Uno Finance would be far ahead. So please remember one thing: if you have a lot of data and you are able to analyze this past data, that potentially creates an entry barrier because the competitor will need to build up the same level of data and do that analysis before he can compete with you. Okay. So, in fact, the other term that we use in our industry is these guys became a kind of category creator, which means nobody else today is offering loans for high risk hospitalization. These guys are. It's a completely new category. They are called a category creator. And by the way, investors love such companies, category creators. Somebody who's charting out a new direction. Okay. Let me just pick up a glass of water. 1 minute. So I've talked about uh, 8 parts of this persistent framework. Now the last two. One is, of course, the team. And when I say team, it starts with the founders. Most important, most important. In fact, we have a saying in the startup world: if you have an average business model but a wonderful team of founders, they'll figure out a way to make it work. But if you have a great business model and average founder, cholbe na, it won't work. That's in Bengali, by the way. Okay, so so that's the issue, right? And finally, what is the final proof? You may have a wonderful business model, great entry barrier, huge scalability. As we say in crude Hindi, was dhanda kahan hai? Are you actually getting customers? Are they paying you? Is that growing month on month? Right? Fortunately, Uno Finance had a wonderful team of two founders with a background in both healthcare and management and finance. And they were able to get very, very solid traction in the first 2 years itself. So Uno Finance fits the definition of this persistent framework brilliantly. Okay, I want to mention one more thing about the persistent framework, which is it's also an English word, correct? And what does that mean? Keep on and on at it. Don't give up, right? It's like the Indian women's hockey team. They lost the first 3 matches and then they went ahead to finish fourth, right? Brilliant. They were persistent, right? So you must remember, as founders, you will always face problems, all kinds of problems. Just keep on and on at it. Keep persisting. Don't give up. Be patient, right? Having talked about the persistent framework, now what do investors look for? Actually, it's the same thing, isn't it? Please remember, the investor and the founder ultimately have the same purpose. They want a good company which keeps out competition, which operates in a large market, which has an innovative solution, scalable, ultimately should make profits, etc., etc., etc. So, what investors look for, whether it is angels or VCs or anybody, and what the founder looks for ultimately is the same thing. And by the way, while this persistent framework has been created by us when we wrote this book, ultimately all investors will look at the same thing, even if the terms they use are different from the ones I have used. Fair? Okay. So investors look for persistent companies and persistent founders. Okay. So what I will do is this is the end of part one, and I was basically trying to show you the framework that I plan to use. What I will do now is I will take you through the next part. Yeah. Okay, Mansfi, can you see this? Hello?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, great. Okay, so having given that background, which is how you evaluate companies, now let's talk about what has been happening to early stage funding over the past many years. And I'm only talking about India. Okay. And this is very interesting. Things have been changing quite dramatically. So let's see how things have changed and what they are like today. So, change number one, if you go back about, let's say, 15, 20 years in time, you only had a few rich angels, right? Who were these rich angels? Ratan Tata, Narayan Murthy, okay, Azim Premji, Anand Mahindra, right? Real rich guys. Mansvi, Malhar Portnes, these real super rich guys, HNIs, what we call super HNIs, high net worth individuals. Mansvi, you're in this category, right?
No, sir. I'm just helping startups by connecting them to investors.
Okay, so at least your father is in this category. That's okay. Chalega. Okay, so rich angels, right? Now, very, very important thing is, because these were rich angels, shelling out 1 or 2 crores, which is typically what founders require in early stages, is not a problem. I mean, Ratan Tata can easily shell out 2 crores. So can Narayan Murthy. So can Azim Premji. There's no problem. So 1 or 2 of these angels is enough to close a deal, to get you funding. Okay. Now what has happened? What has happened, and I'm sure you're familiar with all this. Over the past many years, I would say 10, 12 years, look at the valuations that startups have been getting. Flipkart today is valued at $37 billion. Paytm is going in for an IPO, they're valued at $25 billion. Bajaj, $16 billion. These figures were unheard of 10 years back, isn't it? Okay. Then there is a flood of IPOs from these startups. Zomato is already listed, right? Loss making company, they've listed, right? Just Dial, of course, listed some time back. Nika is about to list. Policy Bazaar is about to list. Paytm should be listing, right? So there is a huge amount of interest in startups, and the valuations they are getting are phenomenal, just phenomenal. Okay, let me take you through one more piece. All of you know what a unicorn is, right? Somebody with a valuation of more than $1 billion, which is about 7 crores. Correct? If you look at the number of unicorns over the past many years, it has been more or less doubling every year, more or less, right? Today, we are in August. We are on the 8th of August, and we already have some 20 unicorns in this year. Last year, we only had how much? 11. Okay, you can see that in the screen. Before that, we had less. So, what's happening? Unicorns are growing dramatically. Okay, and therefore, what is happening to the common man? So I'm not talking of Anand Mahindra or Azim Premji or Nandan Nilekani now, not the super rich angels. Now the common man says, "Arey boss, there is so much money to be made. Why can't I have a share in Baiju's? Why can't I have a share in Zomato? Why can't I have a share in Urban Clap or Urban Company or Cred or Misho or whatever?" Right? And this has been building up over the years. Correct? So what has happened is the interest in investing in startups has just exploded. Just exploded. Okay. So earlier, this is the slide I just showed you. This was the situation earlier. Now you have a new category of angel investor which has come in, which I call the Aam Aadmi angel investor. Who's the Aam Aadmi angel? A person like you and me. I'm an Aam Aadmi angel. I have been a professor for 20 years, which means I was earning a government salary. Before that, I was a salaried employee in the IT industry for 20 years. Again, salaried employee. There is no way I can be, as rich as Azim Premji or Narayan Murthy or any of these guys. But I'm an angel investor. I cannot put in the 2 crores he can, but I can put in 5 lakhs. So there are doctors, there are lawyers, there are middle and senior level executives in companies, there are chartered accountants, small businessmen, huge interest, and therefore everybody is saying, "Boss, मेरे को भी angel investing करनी है." Mansvi, occasionally I switch to Hindi. Is that okay? Or are there people who don't understand Hindi?
No, so it's okay.
It's okay, na? There is no
Yes.
Frenchman, there is no Spaniard.
No, 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 no.
Okay. So what मेरे को भी करना है. I mean, why the hell should I be left out? इतने लोगों ने पैसा बनाया बाइजूस में, फ्लिपकार्ट में. Why can't I make money? Right? So the Aam Aadmi angel has now been born, and I would say these guys have been born in about, I would say about approximately 7 to 8 years earlier, and the number is growing phenomenally. Today you have about 20,000 plus. I would probably say it's about 30,000 today in India. They don't put in 2 crores, they can put in 5 lakhs. And therefore, there are many angels required to complete one deal. Because if you need 1 crore, earlier one angel was enough. Now you need maybe 15 or 20 angels, right? Because each guy puts in 5 or 10 lakhs. Okay, so that's one change which has happened. By the way, I must clarify. I have created this term called Aam Aadmi angel, right? But please remember, it has absolutely nothing to do with what? Mansvi, tell me. Absolutely nothing to do with whom.
Yes, sir.
Whom. I'm asking you.
Uh, I mean,
आम आदमी पार्टी सर.
Absolutely. Who said that? Who said that?
Kapil.
कपिल
Kapil.
कपिल yes, sir.
Kapil, chocolate for you.
Thank you very much sir.
But यार मानसवी से share कर लेना. I mean, ठीक है? So,
Thank you, sir.
so the point, so there absolutely no connection with Mr. Kejriwal's party. This is not a political presentation anyway, but basically it is common man angels like me and like Kapil, like Mansi. Okay, so first change is many angels are required. Second, rich angels used to have their own, analysts, lawyers, accountants who would review startups, who would say, "Boss, यहाँ invest करो, यहाँ नहीं करो. This is good, this is not great," and then they would be able to do the due diligence, etc., etc. The Aam Aadmi angel cannot. He doesn't have his own accountants, his own lawyers, so he needs support, right? So two differences now with the Aam Aadmi angel becoming so common. One, he puts in small amounts, and two, he needs support. Therefore, we have this concept of the angel network, which is basically like a club. And Mansvi did, and Kapil did the earlier speaker talk about angel networks?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
A little bit of idea,
Okay, so
Virendra
maybe
sir.
I'll spend 2 minutes on this since I think it's very, very important. So, the angel network is like a club which has members, and each member is an angel investor. Correct? So, when a startup wants funding, it goes to the network, not to an individual angel. Because see, you don't even know who the individual angel is. He could be your neighbor, you don't know. Right? It could be the neighbor who's driving an Alto, but he may be an angel investor. So you will go to the angel network, number one. Then the angel network will evaluate your startup, decide whether it makes sense to put it up to their members or not. And if they shortlist you, then you make a pitch to their members, and then the members decide it's worth it, not worth it. Should we do a more detailed analysis, etc., etc., etc. At the end of which there is due diligence, accounting, financial, legal, etc., and finally you get your money. Okay, so one fundamental difference that has happened over time in India is from approaching individual angels like, and these guys are not easy to approach. Ratan Tata, Nandan Nilekani, not easy to approach. Today you don't have to. You approach an angel network and they're very easy to approach. Just do a Google search of angel networks in India and you'll get a list of them. And you just email to them, right? So approaching them has become far easier. And today there are several angel networks, there are many of them. So Indian Angel Network is probably the oldest, right? Then we have Lead Angels. By the way, I represent Lead Angels. You have Mumbai Angels, Chennai Angels, Hyderabad Angels. So you have about 8 or 9 of these large guys. These are all large angel networks. Right? Then you have a lot of small guys: Chandigarh Angels, Srinagar Angels, Jaipur Angels, etc., etc. So in all, you probably have about 40 odd angel networks in the country, each of which has its members, and the large ones are about 7 or 8 in number. Okay, so that's one fundamental change which has happened, and therefore, what is the effect of that change on you as a founder? So that's most important. Number one, now, given the fact that you have so many investors and so many networks, you have far more options for funding. Now you're not restricted to only one network or five rich angels. Now you have 30,000 guys and maybe 40 networks, right? So far more options. Secondly, typically, not always, but typically, Aam Aadmi angels will have more time than, let's say, a guy like Azim Premji or Ratan Tata. Because they are running their massive empires. We guys are not. A doctor is not. So, not just, we put in small amounts, we have more time. So, we spend a lot of time mentoring and guiding the startups that we have invested in, right? So you get, that's another plus point that you have with this proliferation of angels. And thirdly, equally important, because you have 15, 20 angels investing together, or sometimes even more, somebody will bring in legal expertise, somebody will bring in experience in the FMCG industry, somebody will have a tech background, somebody will have a finance background, somebody will be an expert in digital marketing. So the advantage to the founder is you have all kinds of different kinds of experience coming in, and that's a huge benefit which earlier you may not have had, right? So funding is not only easier today, you also get a lot more out of funding today, not just money but a lot of guidance, mentorship, network, contacts. Okay, so that's the first change which has happened, and I would say this has happened roughly over the past 10 odd years. And obviously this is growing dramatically today at Lead Angels. Compared to last August, the number of members that we have has tripled, right? So it's gone up 3 times, which is huge. And I can see that happening even more, right? So the number of angels is just exploding. Okay, now let's look at change number 2. Let me just check the time. Okay, we have time. So I'll take one more example, and this is again a startup that I have personally invested in, and it's there in the book. It's a story in the book. It's a very interesting startup which focused on, so I will not give you full details, but broadly it focused on, if you look at um, the recruitment of freshers in companies, the problem is the company executives, typically the HR person and maybe a couple of others, they spend a huge amount of time just shortlisting and doing first round interviews for freshers. And unfortunately, 90% of them were obviously unfit. So they waste time. Correspondingly, for a fresher to get a job is not easy. So what these guys did was they said, okay, we will provide a platform where we will we will build up skills, specific skills of college students. And it could be in the area of programming, it could be in the area of digital marketing, it could be in communication, written communication, etc., etc. And once they have come to a certain level, of course, for which we'll keep giving assignments. So, every time they do an assignment, every time they do an exercise, they build up their skills further. And once they have come to a certain level, we will then put them up to these companies, these potential employers, and those guys then will save time because they are getting not raw people but pre-skilled people. So when they ask for programmers, they're getting people who already are certified by Grey Meter as being good programmers. Okay, so brilliant idea, very good idea. Now, what I'd like to do is, and the reason why I talked about the persistent framework earlier was, I will analyze Grey Meter within this context, and then we'll try and learn from there. I told you Aam Aadmi Angels started investing about 10 years back, right? Not party, angels. Okay, something went wrong. The interesting thing is, Grey Meter was not focusing on colleges like IITs, because IIT guys anyway get placed, not a problem, right? They were focusing on tier 3 and tier 4 colleges. Okay, the problem they realized over time. So, incidentally, when we invested, we thought it was a great idea. They'd already built up a lot of exercises, and we realized that potentially it's a huge opportunity. But these guys, the founders, realized over time, young people in grade 3 or grade 4 colleges, and let's be frank, they have not gone there to study. They've gone there to have a great time. वो कैंटीन में जाएंगे, गर्लफ्रेंड बॉयफ्रेंड के साथ जाएंगे, स्क्वाश खेलेंगे, टेनिस खेलेंगे, पॉलिटिकिंग करेंगे, राइट, नारे लगाएंगे. क्लासरूम में कौन जाता है? इवन इफ यू गो टू क्लासरूम, व्हाई? बिकॉज द बेंचेस आर वंडरफुल एंड यू कैन स्लीप देयर, isn't it? Who studies? So the problem is, most people, most students in these grade 3 and grade 4 colleges were not the serious variety, and therefore, Grey Meter founders kept trying to coax these students. Boss, please skill build, kar lo, we are helping you, we are giving you more and more exercises. They refused. Grey Meter said, okay, we'll give you prizes. You do 4 assignments and we will give you a free mobile case. They were not interested. They said, I don't want to waste time doing assignments. I'm very happy playing cricket and hockey and squash, or playing the guitar, or just, having booze. So that's the problem. And therefore, they did not get enough students to do their assignments. So they did not have enough skilled students to put up to companies. Therefore, ultimately, Grey Meter failed and they had to close down. Okay. Now, the key thing, therefore, is what is the learning from here? The learning is, and see, it's important to understand this. 10 years ago, when Aam Aadmi Angels came into the picture, you know what we used to say, and I was an Aam Aadmi Angel at that time, I am even today. अरे बॉस क्या बढ़िया आइडिया, बॉस इसमें तो पैसा डालो, we will make money, we'll be the next Bajaj. What we did not look at was how much proof did they have. Did they already have traction? Did they already have enough customers? Did they have a growing number of customers? We didn't look at that too much. Today, because angels have lost money, and many Aam Aadmi angels have lost money, so have the rich angels, by the way. Today, the need to look at traction, which means, are you getting enough customers? Are they paying? Is that growing month on month, quarter on quarter? Today, we look at this far, far more. So that's a huge change which has happened, which means 10 years ago, great idea, you may have got funding. Today, I'm not saying you will not get funding, but it will be tougher because today's investor looks for much more proof. Was the business has to be viable? Show it to me. Don't just show me a great idea. Okay, so that's one change which has happened in India. That's change number 2. Look for change number 3. Because there is so much excitement in the world of startups, right? Many areas which a few years ago were very exciting areas have become extremely crowded. Okay, EdTech, for example. I mean, there are just so many people doing school level online learning. Byju's is only one of them. You have Topper, you have Vedantu, who may be bought over by Byju's, right? You have lots of them. Or payments, there are just too many people in the payment space, e-payment space, right? Or online lending space, right? So the problem is, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, even 6, 7 years ago, many of these spaces were not crowded. There were very few people here, very few companies. Today, they've got solidly crowded. So what does that mean to the investor? The investor says, boss, I don't want to invest in a crowded space. I don't want to invest in somebody who's doing what 6 other people are doing anyway and are probably bigger right now. I'm not interested in Me Too companies. What I'm interested in is companies which are different, companies which have an innovative solution. And I'll give you an example here. This is again a company that I have personally invested in. So it's my own story. It's called Planet Spark. They were into K-12 learning online, which basically means what? Children's learning. Right? A hugely crowded space. There's no way they could have competed. But they realized one area which is non-crowded and for which there is a lot of demand is in school going children. Can you build up presentation and writing skills? Presentation and creative writing. They experimented with this and they realized, my God, this is a huge opportunity which nobody is tapping. So, they had identified, they were innovative, they had identified a niche within the education space, online education space, and they're growing dramatically. And I must tell you, the valuation at which they raise money, post money valuation at which they raise money in round one, which was about 3 years back, and the valuation at which they've raised it 1 year back. So in 3 years, that valuation has gone up approximately 20 times. Why? Because investors are interested. Investor says, "Arey boss, you've caught hold of a great niche, and it's a huge niche." By the way, they're not only into India. Their markets are in UK, their markets are in USA, their markets are in Europe, also in Korea and Japan. So it's a global opportunity, and it's all online. Right? So please remember, an area which is of solid interest today may not be of solid interest 4 years down the line, and this has happened. So edtech and payments and online insurance, etc., are crowded markets. Investors are not really interested. What they're interested in today is something new, something innovative, maybe a niche within a crowded space which is not crowded, and ultimately that should be able to keep out the other competitors. Okay, so this is one more change which has happened over the years. I need to talk about one last change, and all of you obviously know this. All of you have experienced COVID, the lockdown, the pandemic, right? It's been with us for what, about 1.5 years now, correct? So I'll give you one more example. This is a startup that I have been again personally involved in. It's called Iril Farms, and their brand name is Iril Fresh. So, what these guys do is they supply organic fruit and vegetables. Let me just talk about vegetables. What's organic? Basically, no chemical fertilizer, no pesticides. Okay. So, what these guys realized was that you can't have one individual farmer who does this, because ultimately, if his neighboring farm is using chemical fertilizers, the water will absorb this fertilizer, it will seep through into your farm, and therefore your vegetables will also get contaminated, and therefore they won't remain organic, right? So you need to identify large clusters of such farms where most farmers are doing organic farming. Okay, so these guys actually tied up with farmers. They identified one very large cluster in the Solan area of Himachal, which is close to Shimla. And most farmers there were doing organic farming. So they used to pick it up from there, bring it to Delhi, actually to Gurgaon. And once they brought it to Gurgaon, sorry, just give me 1 minute. I'll just close the door. Sorry, there's a problem. I'm sitting in Delhi, and in Delhi, 80% houses are getting broken down and rebuilt. So you can hear the drill going on there. Anyway, so they used to pick up this organic produce from these farmers in Himachal, bring it to Gurgaon, and there they would clean it, sort it, etc., etc., and finally make it available to retailers under the brand name of Iril Fresh. Okay, and they were doing very well, very well. All of you know what happened on the 25th of March, 2020. COVID lockdown. Prime Minister announced a lockdown, correct? What did that do to aerial farms? अरे बॉस ट्रांसपोर्ट बंद हो गया. They were transporting stuff from Himachal to Gurgaon, which means they had to cross into from Himachal into Haryana, then again into Punjab, again into Haryana, then into Delhi, and then into Gurgaon. 5 or 4 state borders. No way. Transport was stopped. Going across state borders was impossible. So suddenly, for these guys, the business stopped. Just completely stopped. Agreed? So what did they do? They said, okay, our organic vegetables business has stopped. But what we will do is, there is a crisis, but we will convert the crisis into an opportunity. And they saw an opportunity. They saw that even the regular vegetables were not available readily. Or if they were very, very expensive. Regular meaning non-organic. Correct? So, what they did was they went to local farmers near Gurgaon because obviously Himachal was out. And these were not organic farmers, they were regular farmers. They picked up regular stuff from them and just supplied them to local retailers and made a profit, not under the Ariel Fresh brand because this was not organic, right? But they survived because they were supplying vegetables, they were making a commission on them, and not only survived, they actually grew during the lockdown. And once the lockdown got over, they were back to their normal business. By then, the retailers were delighted with them. They were very happy. Why? Because they said, look, even in terrible times, these guys kept supplying to us. So they are very reliable suppliers. Please remember, even regular vegetables during the lockdown, the mandis were closed or sometimes not operational. The farmer couldn't reach the mandi. The retailer couldn't reach the mandi. These guys picked up from the farmer and directly supplied to the retailer. So they solved a huge problem. Temporary problem, but huge problem. And therefore, once they survived and grew, now they are back to normal and they are now doing extremely well. Okay, what's the learning? And by the way, this is only one example I've taken. But you should look at the learning from this. During COVID or during any crisis, what do investors learn? They learn to invest in fighters. It's very easy in a crisis. So COVID times, there are many founders who said, boss, I can't do anything. Mar gaya, kuch nahi kar sakta hu. All I can do is watch Netflix or play video games and curse the hell out of the virus. Investors don't want such people. Who do investors want? Boss, they want persistent guys who are fighters. Nahi, we are going to fight. We are going to fight. People who convert a problem, a crisis into an opportunity. And Ideal Farms was one such example. And there are many others, right? So, if I were to just summarize, I talked about 4 changes. So, over the past many years in India, right, these are things which have become more and more important. While all of these are important, these have become even more important. So, people are now looking at more traction. They are looking at an innovative solution which can cause an entry barrier. And very important, they are looking at the team, the founders, the fighters, right? And if I were to, of all these, if I were to pick one, you know which one I'll pick? Founders, the team. At an early stage, please remember, if you can impress the investors, if the investors have faith in you, you probably got your money. Okay, so this is what has happened over the past many years. Now I'll just take a couple of minutes, since we've talked about early stage. What about the next stage, VC funding? Actually, if you look at it, much the same thing has happened. VCs are also very clear. They want innovative solutions. They want solutions which create an entry barrier. They will not invest in Me Too companies. So VCs today are not interested in regular edtech companies which are doing what everybody else is doing. They are looking at different things. VCs will look very solidly at traction. And ultimately, VCs will invest in the individual, right? So whether it is early stage or later stage, Ultimately, in India over the past 10-15 years, these are the changes which have taken place, and that's therefore what you as the founder have to look out for.